G'day gents, g'day ladies, thanks for checking into the video today. I've got my 2005 BF Falcon and the engine mount on the passenger side was completely broken and needed to be replaced. Every time I was accelerating from a standstill or looking to accelerate, the engine was lifting out of the engine bay and clunking. It was really loud and not good for the engine at all. Once you replace the engine mount, it'll look something like this, a lot more supported as it's intended to be mounted to the actual chassis. I videoed every step of my way through this job in case it helps you replace your engine mount on your Falcon. Alrighty guys, so what do you get if you cross Snoop Dogg with a Ford Falcon? You get a Ford Falcon. Alrighty guys, let's get to business here. This is what a broken engine mount looks like. It completely shears off in half and your engine isn't mounted to anything. And that's what a brand new mount looks like on the left there. So today's job is to get the old one out and chuck the new one in. So I've also got the part number here on the packet of the brand that I bought for anyone interested. But all the tools that I use, anything that I've actually basically used to get this job done, I'll put in the description of this video below. Step one, let's go remove this air intake piping so that way we can get access to the top engine mount nut. Alrighty guys, so just one note here, be careful, work slowly as you're looking to remove this piping. You don't want to actually crack or tear the piping, otherwise your car's going to run really bad. So just be really careful, nice and slow. And with that out the way, we now get direct vision to the engine mount for the first time. So looking down from here, we can see the top 18mm nut that's holding the actual engine mount to the engine, and then the side 15 and 13mm nuts here that hold the actual engine mount to the chassis. And I'll show you all step by step what I did to remove these three, and that way we could get it out and then swap it over with a new one, chuck it back in. Alrighty guys, let's go. So first thing I needed to buy was a 18mm socket because I didn't have an 18mm handy, and that's the 18mm nut that's securing the engine mount to the actual engine itself. So I went to the local Supercheap Auto store, grabbed one of these. I'll put the link to this below, and I had a really long breaker bar, but before I used the breaker bar I needed some extensions, and I also used this special socket called a universal joint. Now I'll link that below as well. So using a series of extensions and that universal socket, I was able to get to the right angle to actually access that 18mm nut. Now I've got this breaker bar that I was mentioning earlier, which really gives you a lot of good leverage to actually break the nut loose. If you don't have a breaker bar guys, what you can do, a little trick, is get a really long pole, something that you can slip over your ratchet. That way you can get more leverage to break the nut loose. Just be very careful guys, you want to make sure your socket is seated really firmly on that nut, so that way you don't strip the nut, because strip nut's never good. That's it. There we go, so cracked loose. It took a lot of pressure, a lot of force, but we got there. So with it cracked loose, what we're able to do is remove the breaker bar, and I put my ratchet on the extensions here and loosen the nut the rest of the way. Alrighty guys, that's it. So that's the nut loosened, and I'll give you guys a bit of a close-up of these extensions and that universal joint that I used, because it really was a lifesaver, that universal joint. Oh my gosh, without it I don't think you can get to the right angle to get to that nut. And I'll put a link to the product here in the description below, and also these are the extensions I used, all 1/2" ones. Again, I'll put links to these in the description below for you, in case you don't have any already. Alright guys, so now that we've got the top 18mm nut off, we can go and get the 15mm and the 13mm off, and that will let us take the old engine mount out. We'll just have to jack up the engine. Alrighty, let's get to it. To make life a little easier, I used some ramps to bring the car up just so I could fit underneath a bit easier. And I used a rag because my car's got a bit of an oil leak. High kilometers this engine, but still chugging on. So just so I don't get too messy, I just used a rag here just to mop up any loose oil sitting around. And with that done, we can start to move our attention to accessing the first 15mm nut, which is right above, and I should say next to, the oil filter on this BF Falcon. Now, since I've got a power tool, what I noticed was just putting my 15mm ratchet here and on the loosen setting, that was enough to hold this nut in place while I undid the 13mm bolt from the other side. So moving to the other side of the engine mount here, we see the 13mm bolt head. I put my 13mm socket on, use those long extensions again, and I've got a rattle gun, which I'll put a link to that rattle gun in the description below. And I was able to very quickly impact and remove the bolt in its place here. So having that 15mm ratchet on the loosen setting on the other side held the nut in place, and doing a bit of a dack we're able to remove the 13mm bolt here. Certainly, guys, this job is doable without a impact gun, but I found it was much easier with one. So I'll definitely put a link to the impact gun I've got in the description below. It wasn't anything fancy, it was just something from Bunnings, the Ozito brand. Shout out to Ozito, please sponsor me. But that's it. With this 13mm nut, I should say bolt loosened, that's the long boy coming out. And we've now officially unbolted the engine mount from both the engine and also the chassis. This side will be where the 15mm nut was, which is now just fallen on the ground. That's it. Alright guys, so if you've got a BF Falcon, there's actually a cooler that's in the way of the 13mm nut and bolt here. I actually made a video. In a moment I'll show you guys what you can do. But just before that, go and fish your 18mm nut from that top. That way you don't lose it. Awesome. Now, I found my dad's BF Falcon had one of these coolers that was in the way of the 13mm bolt. So I went and made a video to show you guys here that this fitting of this cooler was blocking access to this bolt here. So if you jack up the engine, which I'll show you guys in a sec, if you jack up the engine, that'll actually give you access and clearance for your tools to get to this 13mm bolt here. In other videos on YouTube, people have gone and unbolted the cooler itself, but I found I didn't need to do that. So yeah, there's a little trick for you guys for any BF owners. Now guys, before you go and jack up your engine to remove the engine mount, you want to make sure you disconnect this radiator hose. It's such an important step, guys, because what you'll find if you don't disconnect this hose, as you start jacking up the engine, this hose here will start to get pinched, and it will start to actually lift and pull on the radiator itself, where the other end of this hose is connected to. Now the other end of the hose, it actually fits onto the radiator. It's a plastic outlet, so you don't want to actually risk damaging and cracking that outlet. So put a rag underneath the hosing here, guys, so that way you catch a little bit of the spill as you undo the hose. And I shove the rag into the hose and the thermostat housing there, so I don't make too much of a mess working under the car. This step here, guys, you want to be so careful. It's where you could cause damage to your engine or indeed the sump, as that's where I was lifting up from. I used a really thick piece of wood here to give protection to the sump as I was jacking up. And you do want to jack up quite a lot. I had a very small hydraulic jack, so I needed quite a lot of lift. But once we get that lift sufficient, we're able to then get the engine not sitting on the mount anymore. It's actually now lifted in the air, and we can see that this is that two halves of the engine mount. The bottom section that usually mounts to the chassis, the mid section that has sheared off completely from the top of the mount. And I've sped up the video here. I was trialing quite a few different say positions to remove this engine mount, and after quite a bit of fiddling, we finally got there. Epic. That's it. That's basically the engine mount out. What we've got to do is actually remove the top half, which that's completely sheared off, as we can tell. It's no longer attached to the engine mount. It's seized slightly where that top threading is. So I used a bit of a hammer here to just nudge on that top thread where the 18mm nut used to be on, and that just helps to release that seized section of the engine mount here. So then you can remove the rest by hand. Perfect, and that's it. It's official. The engine mount is out completely. We can now turn our attention to unbolting this old engine mount and chucking the new one in. So over time, the engine torque and putting pressure on the engine mount, it just starts to shear and eventually shears off. And that's where we start to get our engine lifting out of the engine bay, and we get quite a lot of clunking, and definitely not good for the driveline and for the engine itself. Beautiful. So guys, I'll next grab the new engine mount just to show you all here. Not too expensive, which is perfect. And now what we need to do is unbolt. There's a securing nut underneath the engine mount that secures the engine mount to that little bracket. Using my 18mm socket again, I was able to shove this one on here and then use my rattle gun to impact that off. Now, I'm not sure if this is possible to do without a vise if you're using hand tools, but I found just be careful. You can see the engine mount spinning. I just had to hold the engine mount, and the impact gun was able to just rattle the nut off. Epic. And that's it. So now we can start to go through, put the new engine mount into this mount. And I just want to show you guys a bit closer that there's a little, like a locating nipple here. This nipple, it will guide you. You can only go one way into this mount here. So the main thread goes here, and that little nipple goes into that other securing hole. And that's it. You can then go and put your 18mm nut on here to secure it onto the bracket. And again, I used my trusty impact gun. Just careful again, you don't give any shock to the fingers holding the engine mount. So I found the impact gun did really well at tightening this up. Okay guys, so what you want to make sure here is that the engine mount isn't going to come loose from this bracket here. So make sure you go and use manufacturer torque settings. That way you've got certainty. This is my manufacturer torque settings, guys. Very, very sophisticated, I know. But yeah, learn from me. Don't do it just by feel. Go get some manufacturer torque settings, and that way it's all torqued up to spec. And that's it. So I find we can just go and make sure this top locating nipple fits onto the engine side. And I'll show you guys that a bit closer here. We're able to just place in the bracket first. I just slid it in place here. Beautiful. And with that in place, there we are. We can now shift our focus into lowering the engine onto the new engine mount here. So to save a little bit of hassle, guys, I want to kind of show you guys a bit of a recommendation. What you want to do is actually bring up the engine mount, lift the thread into that hole there, and that locating pin will also locate, and then chuck the 18mm nut on by hand. And that way it's actually going to save you a lot of hassle, because I found trying to actually lower the engine, so just be very careful as you lower the engine here. And this is a bit of a close-up view. As you start to lower the engine, it'll actually seat in place onto the block. So you'll find there's a bit of a gap here, but as the engine lowers more and more, we can see the engine side here lowers onto the engine mount. Perfect. Now at this stage, I lost a lot more coolant, so you can go and reattach the top radiator hose and tighten up that clamp there. And essentially, guys, all we've got to do from here is go through and bolt the engine mount in place. So I started off, before I did the 13 and 15mm nut and bolt, I went back to the 18mm nut here and tightened the rest of it with my ratchet. We see there's a bit of a gap still between the engine mount and that bracket here. So I was just tightening as much as I could by hand, and later we'll tighten it from the top with our series of extensions. So go as much as you can here by hand. Awesome. Down the bottom here, I found that my 13mm bolt didn't pass through all the way. I needed to shift the bracket slightly so that it could pass all the way through. But one little trick that I found was having a look from the other side and tightening the 18mm nut started to jiggle that bracket into place. So I'll just show you guys tightening that top one up to the point that it couldn't tighten anymore, and then going through and checking the other side. I'll show you all that you could see the 13mm bolt just wasn't lining up 100%, so it was fouling. And I'll show you guys here from the other side, and we'll see here that's the gold 13mm bolt, but it wasn't actually fitting through. So with a little bit of fiddling off camera here, and I used a back end of my hammer, that actually helped it just nick through into that opening. So boom, that's that. And this is our 15mm nut. You can chuck it on by hand to start with, and once you tighten this up, you've officially got a brand new engine mount installed and all bolted up into your engine bay. So good, so good. I do want to give some props to current videos that were out there that guided me in what to do. But this was again another trick. I left my ratchet on the Titan setting and went back to the other side, got the 13mm socket and the extensions with my ratchet gun, and I should say, sorry, with my impact gun, and went through and tightened this one. Again, make sure anytime using impact guns here, guys, you're square on to the bolt head so you're not going to strip anything. But as I was mentioning earlier, big props to the current videos out there that gave me a bit of an idea of what to do here. I wanted to make a little video just to show you all a little bit of a different view and perhaps a bit more up close and personal with some of the steps. So I hope it all helps you guys. No more gap here, that's perfect. So it's all well tight. We just got to again make sure you're using manufacturer torque settings and torquing everything up to spec. Coming from the top down, I used that universal joint again on the 18mm socket, and I went through and just tightened this up again. Again, guys, learn from me. Don't do it just by feel. Do it by the manufacturer recommended torque settings. I just went and used my wrist, the old wrist, tighten it up until you can tell that it's tight enough before you strip it. That's it. All right, guys, so with that done, you can go through and double check from the bottom. I just used my ratchet again to double check for any play, and you can double check the 13 and 15mm as well. And with all that checked and tightened up, you can go and put your accordion back on here, and and with that done, that's it. That's the job completed, guys. How good. Guys, I'd like this video to be more of an overview, especially for anyone that isn't too experienced with spinning, wrenches on cars. I don't want anyone to be kind of falling into a loophole of not being able to get the engine mounted back up properly to the engine mount and to the chassis. So be careful, do some research, perhaps only take this on if you've got some good confidence and experience with cars. But other than that, just double check everything's nice and tight, and you've got yourself a replaced engine mount. You guys will absolutely love how smooth the car will just power and accelerate, because we get so used to having quite a lot of engine play every time we accelerate. So as soon as it gets replaced, guys, it's just so smooth, so buttery. You guys will love it. Guys, I just wanted to take a moment and just say thank you to everyone that's supporting me and supporting this channel. I never expected that I'd be getting to almost 1,000 subscribers. This is amazing. Really, that's not my goal. This is always a good excuse for me to take on some, car DIY jobs that I normally wouldn't do. So thanks to you guys for giving me an excuse to do things that I, am enjoying and also learning as we go. So for now, always, you can send me a message on Instagram. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to catching up with you all either in the comments here or on Instagram. As always, don't forget to flick something for good luck. But for now, guys, stay healthy, stay safe, and I look forward to the future videos with you. Cheers. I like my Falcon, Falcon. I like my Falcon.